The capture. The screaming alarms in Captain Marcus Vale's cockpit finally fell silent as his reconnaissance ship plowed through the crimson sand dunes of Xerion, leaving a trail of twisted metal and smoke in its wake. He tasted blood, felt the sharp sting of cuts across his forehead, and realized with grim satisfaction that he was still breathing. That was more than he'd expected 30 seconds ago when the Xerion plasma cannons had turned his starboard engine into expensive confetti. Marcus unbuckled his restraints with shaking hands, his pilot training kicking in despite the chaos. Emergency. Protocol. Assess injuries, secure the crash site, activate distress beacon. He'd done this drill 100 times in simulation, but the simulations never included the bone-deep ache of actual impact or the acrid smell of burning electronics filling his lungs. "Computer, status report," he croaked, his voice barely recognizable. "Main systems offline. Hull breach in sections 4 through 7. Distress beacon. Damaged." The synthetic voice crackled with static. "Estimated rescue probability, 12%. "Fantastic," Marcus muttered, hauling himself from his pilot's seat. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the alien landscape stretching endlessly. Rust-colored sand beneath twin purple suns, with jagged crystalline formations jutting from the ground like frozen lightning. Beautiful and utterly hostile. He'd been on a routine border patrol when the attack came. The Xerion Empire had been quiet for months since the armistice negotiations stalled, but intelligence suggested they were mobilizing again. Marcus had been sent to confirm troop movements along the contested zone. Instead, he'd flown straight into an ambush. The sound of approaching engines made his blood freeze, heavy, rhythmic thumping that grew louder by the second. Marcus grabbed his sidearm and what remained of his emergency supplies, then scrambled through the ship's twisted exit hatch. The desert heat hit him like a physical blow, and he squinted against the glare of twin suns. 3 massive hover transports crested the nearest dune, their hulls gleaming with an oily rainbow sheen that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Each transport was the size of a city bus, floating 3 feet above the sand on cushions of crackling energy. As they settled around his crash site, Marcus got his first good look at the Xerion military up close. They emerged from the transports, like living statues, 8 feet tall, humanoid but unnaturally graceful, their bodies covered in form-fitting crystalline armor that sparkled with inner light. Their faces were hidden behind faceted helmets that reflected the world in broken fragments, and when they moved, their joints hummed with barely contained power. Marcus had seen holographic briefings, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of their presence, ancient, alien, and utterly intimidating. One of them, distinguished by golden filigree, threading through his crystal armor, approached Marcus with measured steps. The alien's voice, when it came, was surprisingly melodious, filtered through some kind of translation device. "Human pilot, you will surrender your weapons and submit to capture." Marcus looked at the dozen warriors surrounding him, each carrying weapons that hummed with enough energy to vaporize him twice over. His pistol suddenly felt very small and very inadequate. "Well," he said, slowly placing his sidearm on the sand, "when you put it like that." The journey to the Xerion war camp took 3 hours across increasingly treacherous terrain. Marcus sat in the back of one transport, hands bound with what felt like liquid crystal that had hardened around his wrists. His guards remained silent, their helmeted faces turned toward him with unnerving intensity. He tried making conversation twice, and received only that unsettling harmonic humming in response. The war camp materialized from the desert like a mirage becoming solid. Massive dome structures rose from the sand, their surfaces rippling with the same rainbow oil slick effect as the transports. Crystalline spires twisted skyward, crackling with energy that made Marcus's hair stand on end. Thousands of Xerion warriors moved through the complex with purposeful efficiency, preparing for what looked like a major military operation. They brought Marcus to a detention structure that felt more like a work of art than a prison. The walls, curved organically, embedded with soft, glowing crystals that provided gentle illumination. His cell was spacious and surprisingly comfortable, with what appeared to be furniture grown rather than manufactured. A basin filled with clear, sweet water sat in one corner, and the air circulation system hummed with a sound like distant wind chimes. Hours passed. Marcus tried to estimate time by the changing quality of light filtering through the translucent walls, but the alien suns followed patterns he didn't understand. He was beginning to think they'd forgotten about him when the cell door dissolved with a soft chime. The escort that came for him was different from his captors. These guards wore more elaborate armor, their crystal plating inlaid with intricate patterns that seemed to move when Marcus wasn't looking directly at them. They guided him through corridors that opened and closed around them like living tissue, past chambers filled with incomprehensible technology and aliens engaged in activities he couldn't begin to interpret. The throne room, if that's what it was, defied every expectation Marcus had formed about alien architecture. The space was vast and circular, its domed ceiling depicting what looked like star maps in slowly shifting constellations of light. The floor was polished crystal that reflected the ceiling above, creating the disorienting impression of walking through space itself. And there, at the room's center, stood Queen Zephyra. Marcus had seen intelligence photos, grainy surveillance images that captured only shadows and suggestions. Nothing had prepared him for the reality. She was tall, even by Zerion standards, with skin that gleamed like polished silver and hair that flowed like liquid starlight down to her waist. Her armor, if it could be called armor, seemed to be made of crystallized moonbeams, form-fitting and elegant beyond human artistry. When she turned to look at him, her eyes held depths that suggested she had seen the birth and death of stars. "Captain Marcus Vale," she said, and her voice was like music played on instruments that didn't exist. "Pilot of the 3rd Reconnaissance, Squadron, son of Dr. Elizabeth Vale and engineer Thomas Vale of New Geneva Colony, age 32 standard years, unmarried, no children." Marcus swallowed hard. "You know more about me than most dating apps." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her ethereal features. "We make it our business to know those who trespass in our space, though trespass may be too strong a word. You were following orders, were you not?" "I was conducting a routine patrol along the neutral zone," Marcus replied carefully. "Your people opened fire first." "My people," Zephyra repeated, and there was something almost sad in the way she said it. "Yes, they follow their orders as well. Such is the nature of war, Captain Vale. Good beings on both sides, following orders that lead to nothing but suffering." She began to walk around him, her movements fluid and hypnotic. Marcus found himself holding his breath, uncertain whether he was in the presence of royalty or something far more dangerous. "Tell me, Captain," she continued, "what do you know of the negotiations between our peoples?" "Not much above my clearance level," Marcus admitted. "I know they've stalled. Both sides blame the other for bad faith." "Both sides are correct," Zephyra said with a bitter laugh. "There are factions among my people who would see every human world burn to ash, and there are humans who would strip mine every crystal from our sacred sites without a second thought. Peace is difficult when extremists whisper poison in willing ears." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Marcus could see his reflection in her silver eyes. The air between them seemed to shimmer with potential energy. "But that is not why you are here, Captain Vale. Not really." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Queen Zephyra leaned forward, close enough that her breath tickled his ear. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, carrying a weight of desperate urgency that made his heart race. "Protect my daughter." Marcus jerked back, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" But Zephyra had already stepped away, her expression once again unreadable. "Guards will escort you to your quarters. We will speak again tomorrow." "Wait." Marcus called as the crystal-armored sentries moved toward him. "What daughter? What are you talking about?" The Queen's only response was a look of such profound sadness that it made Marcus's chest ache. Then the guards were guiding him away, and the magnificent throne room dissolved behind them like a dream. His new quarters were considerably more luxurious than his cell, though equally alien in design. As Marcus sat on what passed for a bed, a raised crystal platform covered with something that felt like solidified clouds, he replayed the encounter over and over in his mind. "Protect my daughter." 4 words that made no sense. According to every intelligence briefing he'd ever received, Queen Zephyra had no heirs. The Xerian succession was matrilineal but not hereditary. Queens were chosen by the Council of Crystals through means humans didn't understand. There had never been any mention of a daughter. Unless... Marcus's mind raced. What if the intelligence was wrong? What if there was a daughter hidden away for some reason? And why would an alien queen ask a human prisoner to protect her? The answer, when it came, arrived with his dinner. The meal was brought by a young female Xerian who moved with unusual hesitancy. She was smaller than the warriors Marcus had encountered, her armor simpler and less ornate. When she set the tray down, she glanced nervously toward the door before speaking in heavily accented but clear English. "You are the human pilot?" Marcus nodded. "That's me. And you are?" "I am." She hesitated, then lifted her hands to her helmet. The crystal faceplate dissolved, revealing features that made Marcus's breath catch. The girl was unmistakably Xerion, the silver skin, the elongated proportions, the subtle luminescence that all her species possessed. But her eyes were brown, human brown, and the shape of her face held familiar angles that no pure-blooded Xerion would have. "I am Lyrian," she said softly, "and I believe my mother sent you here to keep me alive." The protection Marcus stared at Lyrian in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The girl, no young woman, he realized, stood before him with an expression that mixed defiance and vulnerability in equal measure. Her hybrid features were striking and impossible to ignore. The ethereal silver skin of her Xerion heritage marked with distinctly human bone structure, creating something entirely new and beautiful. A half-human, Marcus finally managed. "That's why she asked me to protect you." Lyrian nodded, her brown eyes, so startling in that luminescent face, darting nervously toward the door again. "The Council of Crystals has decreed that I am an abomination, a genetic pollution that threatens the purity of our species. There have been 3 attempts on my life in the past month. And your mother thinks a crashed human pilot can do better than her royal guards?" A bitter smile crossed Lyrian's lips. "My mother thinks that sometimes the best protection comes from the most unexpected sources. Also," she added, settling gracefully onto the crystal floor beside his bed, "you're expendable. If you die protecting me, it's unfortunate but acceptable. If one of her elite guards dies, it creates political complications." Marcus couldn't help but laugh. "Well, that's refreshingly honest. So what's the plan? Do I just follow you around looking intimidating?" "Actually," Lyrian said, her expression growing serious, "we need to leave. Tonight." The urgency in her voice made Marcus sit up straighter. "What's happened?" "General Kethvar arrived this afternoon with a full battle contingent. He's one of the most vocal opponents of human-Xerion cooperation, and he's been pushing the Council to have me eliminated as a threat to species integrity. My mother can protect me from assassins, but she can't openly defy a council decree without triggering civil war." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. "So we run. Where exactly does one hide on an alien planet where I stick out like a neon sign?" "The Sanctuary of Whispers," Lyrian replied. "It's an ancient meditation retreat in the Crystal Canyons, about 200 kilometers from here. The priests there have sworn neutrality in all political matters. Even the council respects their sanctuary laws. 200 kilometers across hostile alien terrain with people trying to kill us, Marcus summarized. Sounds like a vacation. Lyrian's hybrid features shifted into what might have been a smile. You humans have such an interesting relationship with danger. Is that why my father chose to stay on your worlds rather than return to us? The question hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. He studied Lyrian's face, seeing new layers of pain in her expression. You never knew him? I know his name was Ambassador David Chen, and that he and my mother worked together during the first peace negotiations 15 years ago. I know he left before I was born, and I know my mother has never spoken of him since. She paused, her voice growing softer. I know she still wears the bracelet he gave her, hidden beneath her armor. Marcus felt a stab of sympathy for this girl, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Maybe he didn't abandon you. Maybe the political situation made it impossible for him to stay. Perhaps, Lyrian said, but Marcus could hear the doubt in her voice. She stood, moving with that fluid Zerion grace. We leave in 2 hours when the guard changes. Can you be ready? Do I have a choice? You could refuse. My mother would probably have you executed, but death is technically an option. You really need to work on your motivational speeches, Marcus said. But he was already mentally cataloging what supplies they'd need. 2 hours it is. The escape from the war camp required every stealth skill Marcus had learned in his military training, and several he improvised on the spot. Lyrian proved surprisingly adept at moving unseen, her hybrid, nature allowing her to mimic both human unpredictability and Zerion fluid motion. They slipped through service corridors that Lyrian knew from childhood, past guard posts where she used her royal access codes, and finally to a maintenance bay where a small hover scout waited. You can fly this? Marcus asked, examining the alien controls. I've been piloting since I was 12, Lyrian replied, sliding into what he assumed was the pilot's seat. The principles are similar to your human aircraft, just more intuitive. The next few hours passed in a blur of alien landscape rushing beneath them. Lyrian proved to be an excellent pilot, keeping them low to avoid detection while navigating, by landmarks only she could recognize. Marcus found himself studying her profile as she concentrated on flying, noting how the cockpit's soft lighting brought out the best of both her heritages. Tell me about the sanctuary, he said during a brief rest stop beside a crystalline oasis. It was built over 1,000 years ago by the first Zerion mystics, Lyrian explained, refilling their water containers from the naturally filtered spring. They believed that the crystals in that region amplified psychic energy, allowing deeper meditation and communion with what you might call the universal consciousness. And the priests there will really protect us? They have to. Sanctuary law is older than the monarchy, older than the council. Breaking it would be like, she searched for a comparison Marcus would understand. Like burning down your most sacred religious sites. Even General Kethvar wouldn't dare. Marcus hoped she was right, but he'd learned not to trust anyone's certainty about politics, human or alien. They reached the crystal canyons as Zerion's twin suns began their slow descent toward the horizon. The landscape was breathtaking. Towering formations of natural crystal that caught and refracted the sunset into 1,000 rainbow colors. The air itself seemed to shimmer with residual energy, and Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation along his skin. We're close, Lyrian said, but her voice carried a note of concern that made Marcus look at her sharply. What's wrong? The sanctuary beacon should be visible from here. It's always lit, day and night. She pointed toward a gap between two massive crystal spires. But I don't see it. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Could they have moved it? The beacon hasn't moved in 3 centuries. Lyrian's knuckles were white where she gripped the control stick. Something's wrong. They approached the sanctuary cautiously, using the crystal formations for cover. What they found made Marcus's blood run cold. The ancient building lay in ruins, its graceful spires toppled and smoking. Scorch marks from plasma weapons scarred the crystal walls, and debris littered the courtyard where peaceful gardens had once grown. "No," Lyrian whispered, her voice breaking. "They wouldn't dare. The sanctuary laws only work when people follow them," Marcus said grimly. He activated his helmet's scanner, searching for life signs. "I'm picking up movement in the ruins. Could be survivors." They landed a safe distance away and approached on foot. The devastation was even worse. Up close, walls that had stood for a millennium reduced to rubble, ancient artifacts scattered and broken. But as they picked their way through the debris, Marcus heard something that made him freeze. "Lyrian," a voice called softly from the shadows. "I was hoping you would come here." General Kethvar emerged from behind a fallen column, his elaborate crystal armor unmarked by the destruction around him. Behind him came a squad of elite warriors, their weapons trained on Marcus and Lyrian. "Uncle Keth," Lyrian said, and Marcus heard the betrayal in her voice. "You did this. You destroyed the sanctuary." "A regrettable necessity," the general replied, his translated voice carrying no hint of remorse. "The priests refused to cooperate with the council's decree. They claimed sanctuary law superseded our authority. I was forced to correct their misunderstanding." "You murdered innocent priests to get to me?" Lyrian's voice shook with rage and grief. "I eliminated obstacles to the greater good of our species," Kethvar said coldly. "Just as I will eliminate you and your human pet." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Lyrian, though he knew it was futile against this many armed opponents. "If you're going to kill us anyway, at least tell us why. What's so dangerous about one half-human girl?" Kethvar's helmet dissolved, revealing a face that was classically Zerion, but marked with fanatic's fervor. "She represents corruption, dilution, the beginning of the end of what makes us Zerion. If we allow mixing with your kind within a few generations, there will be no pure Zerion left, only mongrels." "You're talking about genocide," Marcus said. "I'm talking about survival. Your species spreads like a plague, consuming resources, adapting to any environment. You would make us like you, weak, short-lived, bound to a single world instead of the cosmos." The general raised his weapon. "But it ends here." Marcus tensed, preparing to throw himself at the nearest warrior in a desperate gambit to give Lyrian a chance to escape. But before he could move, the air around them began to hum with barely contained energy. Lyrian stepped forward, and as she did, the crystal formations throughout the canyon began to resonate with her presence. The shattered remains of the sanctuary started to glow, responding to something in her hybrid nature that pure Zerion or pure human couldn't trigger. "You want to know what makes me dangerous, Uncle?" Her voice carried harmonics that made the crystal walls sing. "It's not that I'm half-human, it's that I'm something new, something that doesn't fit your categories." The energy built to a crescendo, and suddenly every piece of crystal in the canyon blazed with light. The general's warriors staggered, their weapons failing as the electromagnetic pulse overloaded their systems. Kethvar himself dropped to one knee, his armor's power systems, cycling desperately to compensate. "Impossible," he gasped. "No one can channel raw crystal energy without training." "No pure blood can," Lyrian corrected. "But I'm not pure blood, am I?" She turned to Marcus, her eyes now glowing with the same light as the crystals around them. "The transport behind the fallen spire. Can you get us there?" Marcus nodded, understanding instinctively that whatever she was doing couldn't last long. They ran through the chaos of overloaded systems and blinded warriors, reaching the hidden transport just as Lyrian's power began to fade. She collapsed into the pilot's seat, her hybrid features pale with exhaustion. "That was incredible," Marcus said as he fired up the engines. "How did you—" "I don't know," she gasped. "I've never been able to do anything like that before. It was like the crystals were singing to something in my blood." As they lifted off, leaving the confused warriors. Behind, Marcus found himself thinking about evolution, about the way species adapted and changed. Maybe that's what terrified people like General Kethvar. Not that Lyrian was an abomination, but that she represented something genuinely new. "Where to now?" he asked as they flew into the alien night. "There's a human outpost at the edge of the neutral zone," Lyrian said, her strength slowly returning. "If we can reach it, you can contact your people. Maybe together, our species can find a way forward that doesn't involve people like my uncle deciding who lives and dies." Marcus looked at her, this impossible girl who belonged to two worlds and was creating a third, and realized that Queen Zephyra had been right to trust him with her protection. Not because he was expendable, but because sometimes the most important. Bridges were built by the most unlikely people. "Together it is," he said, setting course for the human outpost and whatever uncertain future awaited them there. Behind them, the crystal canyon still glowed faintly with residual energy. And somewhere, in that light lay the promise of something entirely new, if they could survive long enough to see it born.